Coming to us all the way out of space, audiology space.
You know it.
Hey, could
The
you share
void between our ears.
That's right. Dr. Gregory, can you share with our audience a little bit about you, your background, and your journey that influenced and inspired your career as an audiologist?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like a lot of people, I fell into my career accidentally. But when I look back in hindsight, everything makes sense. I can see a direct path from a specific point in time in my life. I was I grew up in Rochester, New York, went to West Rondequoit High School. We have an amazing radio station there. And, so in the 90s, I was discovering all sorts of incredible music and kind of becoming a music nerd, getting really into, indie rock and punk rock and hardcore and anything under the alternative umbrella. But I grew up in around healthcare providers. My mom and my grandmother were nurses. They were really passionate about providing healthcare, and not just healthcare, but quality healthcare. And they both worked with primarily geriatric populations. So from a real early age, I was sort of hit over the head with an emphasis on quality of life, especially for people in their later years. Fast forward a few years, I moved to California, and I spent the better part of 10 years in and around the music industry. I was running record stores. I had my own record label where I was putting out 7-inch records for Southern California bands, mostly punk and indie bands, and doing shows and stuff like that. And I was playing music in some bands myself, and I ended up joining one of the bands on my label and spent the better part of almost 4 years touring with them, playing all around the country. And it was great because I got to play music with friends, and I got to see, the lower 48 doing it and meet people from, so many different backgrounds and, ideas and thought processes, and, just kind of see the country and have fun doing it. But I couldn't really hold down a job while I was on tour, in between tours. So I would just take temp jobs. And one of my temp jobs was at a speech path and hearing center. And I always knew that I wanted to go back to school after I got my AA out of high school at MCC. And I was like, man, the speech path thing really makes sense. I saw the quality of life that was being impacted. I saw the difference that was being made in the lives of these kids and their families and their parents. And so I knew when I was done with the touring thing that I wanted to go back to school for speech path. So a couple of years later, I ended up back in Rochester, and I started looking for a speech pathology program. And so there's one locally here at Nazareth. And when I got there, the program is communication sciences and disorders. And it's sort of an umbrella program for both speech pathology and audiology. And audiology was a term I hadn't really heard previously. I knew what hearing aids were, but other than that, I really didn't know anything about the profession. And while I was studying, I found that I really gravitated towards the audiology side of things. With my background in music and someone that is, affected in such a positive way by sound and everything that we hear around us, day to day, I wanted to be able to help people that wanted help recovering sound and the ability to hear. So I could see this real kind of direct connection there. So I decided to get my doctorate in audiology, and ended up going to Northwestern for grad school, and then moved back here in 2017.
Incredible. So I think it's interesting that, like, when you said, I mean, you're obviously still passionate about music, right? So that still carries through your profession, even though you're living a very different life now than you were touring on the road. How do you miss playing like that at all?
Man, that's a tough question. I don't miss being, broke and starving.
Yeah, the glamorous parts.
Yeah. But I mean, it was great. I loved it, and I have absolutely no regrets about my time doing it. and music will always be a part of my life. I still play in a local band, Periodic Table of Elephants. I play in a band that's all recordings have been done via email with a guy in Brooklyn and a couple of guys in Chicago. Actually, literally an hour ago, the band I toured with the most from California, a band called Bullet Train to Vegas, we just put out our first release in 16 years.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
We dug out from the vaults a full length that never got released and gave it a proper mix and mastered it. And the first track went out like an hour ago. So, so it's still very much a part of my world. And,
Where could we hear that?
There's a band camp for it. The band is called Bullet Train to Vegas. So if you just look up for that in Bandcamp, you'll find it. So I mean, touring was great and I love it. And, if someone wanted to throw a pile of money at me and so I didn't, so I could afford to leave my day job, sure, maybe I'd do it again, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So
So you didn't like totally abandon your musical life, like you're still actively a musician.
Absolutely. Yeah. My local bands, PTOE, we rehearse weekly, pre-pandemic, we were playing shows, a couple times a month and, between Buffalo and Syracuse. And, we still like to do it. We played in Atlantic City. So we'll still go out of town to play shows. And we like to play with, at the Bug Jar a lot and Three Heads Brewery and things like that. So
now I recall like you guys are pretty hard rock too, right?
Yeah, we're that's kind of the joke or the irony is that we're a really loud band.
I mean, what better person to like really be in a band with than an audiologist, right? At least like even at like the level that you're playing, I'm sure it's more mindful than the level that most rockers would be playing.
I mean, it's a yeah, mindful is one word for it. Yeah, my bandmates might tell you that it gets a little annoying at times, but they all protect their hearing, and I preach that from day one. That we're not practicing if people don't have their ears in, and everybody's super respectful of if someone's got their ears out, no one's hitting their instrument or anything like that. And when I play shows, I bring boxes of earplugs. They're on our merch table. I throw them on the front of the stage. If people want them, please take them. And I encourage people to always wear hearing protection when they go see live music. So yeah, so I, really this job is my penance for years of playing in really loud bands. Now I get to help them on the other side.
I love that. I think that's great. So, I mean, tell us, we were talking about this before. Like, I think it's interesting because, and I'm guilty of this too. We get our annual physicals, right? We see doctors regularly, for various things, but not many people consider, I feel like the ears is like the last thing on the list. I mean, at least for me, I don't think about it much, which is the irony, right? As I'm a musician and I know I'm not alone on that. So, I mean, how can you persuade the population that is like me to take better care of their hearing and to go get these checkups?
So glad you brought that up. You're absolutely right. Musicians, or not just musicians, but people in general, we sort of triage our health needs, and hearing healthcare falls way to the bottom of the list. And when hearing loss starts to take effect for whatever the reason, what usually happens is that we lose the clarity of sound, whether it's speech or music. We can still hear that it's happening, but it just isn't as clear as it used to be, and it's gradual. So people don't notice it as much until all of a sudden it gets to a point where it's like, wow, I'm really struggling, or their friends are commenting, their family's commenting. So it gets pushed way down. And there's data that shows that most people, once they recognize they have an issue with their hearing, that they wait 7 to 10 years to do something about it. So it's really important for people to incorporate hearing health into part of their regular wellness routine. And for musicians, whether we're making money at it or not, it's a profession, right? This is what we do. And, if you were a pilot, you would have to get your eyes checked regularly, right? Or if you're a professional athlete, you're getting all sorts of physicals annually, several times a year. Why is it that musicians don't do anything about their hearing on a regular basis? When I lecture to groups of musicians, I always ask people, I say, what's your first instrument? And hands go up, guitar, clarinet, trumpet, and I always kindly disagree. Your first instrument is your ears.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And for most of us to be an elite level musician, hearing health is really, paramount. So, a lot of musicians will come in like, oh, I've been playing for years. The damage is already done. It's too late for me. It's never too late to start protecting the residual hearing that you have. And a lot of musicians are surprised when I test their hearing that, maybe they have loss or they do have loss, but it's not as bad as they thought it was. So there's even more incentive then to start actively protecting it, immediately and consistently. So, I can't stress it enough. Get an annual hearing test, get a baseline hearing test if you're a musician, even if you're a hobbyist, and then check it yearly to make sure it's not changing and protect your hearing.
Could hearing loss be like hereditary?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's really 5 main causes of hearing loss. And, a lot of people say, oh, it's because I got old, and there's a term for it. It's called presbycusis. But age alone is not a predictor of hearing loss. Really, what causes hearing loss are genetics, noise exposure, whether occupational or recreational, certain medications, typically life-saving medications like chemotherapy drugs, anti-malarial drugs, things like that, certain viruses and diseases, and vascular issues, so issues with blood flow. Blood's the nutrition for the ears, so when that's disrupted, it can be real problematic for hearing. So yeah, genetics for sure, absolutely.
I worry about this because like my mother, so my mom and dad are from downstate, like Brooklyn and the Bronx. And, they have this like Archie Bunker relationship going on. Like they're always yelling at each other. I'm from Long Island too. So like people are loud, like they're loud. Everybody talks over each other. It's just like a normal thing. And, I just noticed like I go to my parents' house, they watch my son a lot, and I go there and they always got the TVs loud, they're both in their 70s. They got the TVs always too loud. And my mom, like, she's like, huh? What? Huh? Right? Like every time I'm like talking to her and I'm just growing frustrated, like, Mom, what the heck? Like, and I'm thinking like maybe selective hearing, right? Because of those reasons I mentioned before. Well, come to find out that she actually had hearing loss. And I mean, not funny, right? But like she actually had hearing loss. So she got a hearing aid. And at the time that she got the hearing aid, um, my son, who she was watching often, he was a baby, so sometimes he would scream and the thing would go haywire. But I don't think she knows how to properly use it. Is it common? And so now she doesn't wear it and she still walks around, huh? What? And I'm, Mom, put your hearing aids in, like you're not hearing the way you can. And she's just kind of living with it, which can't be a good thing. So, I mean, I guess my question is when these people receive a hearing aid, right? Is there like a way that I mean, is this like does anybody go over with them like how to properly use it, or is there a way that they could have easier accessibility to knowing to use their device right and to use it for what they paid for?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of that depends on the practice you go to. I mean, most audiologists are going to go through an orientation process when you get fit with hearing aids. Hearing aids are real different from eyeglasses. Okay, if we're going to make a comparison to something else that we deal with on a regular basis, you go get your eyeglasses, you get your new lenses, you put them on, you can read the sign across the room, maybe you have a little headache for an hour, and then you go on with your day. And obviously that's a generalization, but with hearing aids, when you start introducing sound back into the brain, because really we hear with our brains more than our ears, we start changing neural pathways, and it can be a little overwhelming for people in the beginning. So we go through a pretty extensive orientation process, not only on how to use the hearing aids physically, how to put them on, how to clean them, care for them, manipulate them, change the volume, things like that. But we also talk a lot about expectations and encourage people that they need to use the hearing aids habitually, especially in the beginning. They're really not made for situational use. If you only put them on to go out to the restaurant on the weekends with your friends, it's going to sound noisy and loud to you, so you really have to allow yourself and your brain time to get used to the way the world sounds around you. Even sounds that maybe you don't feel like you need to hear or want to hear, but you just haven't had access to that sound, those environmental sounds like the microwave or doorbells or a creaky floorboard or something like that. But the brain has to learn how to hear those again so it can learn how to ignore them again. You and I hear the creaky floorboard, but we ignore it,
Yeah.
But when it's a new sound, when it's a novel sound to somebody who hasn't heard it in years, it's like, wow, what is that? So, encourage your mom to go back to her provider, for reinstruction, or if she's not happy with her provider, find another provider that can help her with those sorts of things.
Sure. I mean, you think it's probably pretty common though that there are people like her, right? That are just kind of walking around like with these devices that they paid for, but they just fear the technological part of it, and how to just really maybe ask for the help, on how to wear it the right way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, again, I think why we really encourage, people when we fit hearing aids, it's the fitting process, that appointment, and then there's the follow-up appointments, and there's, 1 or 2 or 3 follow-up appointments, as many as you need to make sure that you got it right. Some people have it all down pat after 1 appointment, and other people, they need, reminders. They'll come back 6 months or a year later and say, I remember you showed me this thing, but I don't remember. Can you just go through that whole thing again? And I have people with hearing aids that are 2 and 3 years old, and I'll go through that process, several times with them, to make sure they have it. And I'll, have them demonstrate to me that they can do it, as opposed to just showing them, and just talking to them, but like actually letting them physically do it and prove to me that they can, and more importantly, to prove to themselves that they can. So it's, when you think about only 20% of the people with hearing loss in the country that could benefit from hearing aids actually wear them. And then of that percentage, how many of them put them on and go home and put them in the sock drawer?
Yeah.
So
The whole hereditary thing freaks me out because, so my mom has this hearing loss. I'm sure my dad has some hearing loss, but hearing's everything to me, I, like choosing the lesser of evils, like we were saying before, like people are like, would you rather be deaf or blind? It's like, I would prefer not to be either, but I couldn't imagine not having my hearing, especially as a musician and listening for all those sounds meditatively, when I'm by the beach and I close my eyes, or if I'm outside and you feel summer coming, and you hear the sounds of nature, it's like all that stuff that's that's what fuels my soul. So, Rochester has one of the largest deaf populations per capita, meaning that out of our total population of Rochester's substantial percentage is deaf. So as a result of this, do you feel are you treating people from all over the country, or is Rochester a big hub for conferences and so on and so forth?
So we do have one of the highest per capita deaf populations in the country. We have a really strong deaf community here in Rochester. Washington, D.C. is the other one. And the reason these 2 areas are so big is because of the universities that we have. So we have the National Technical Institute for the Deaf at RIT here in Rochester, and in DC, they've got Gallaudet University. And I think just because these schools have been around for so long and have had such a footprint in the community, that when individuals with hearing loss come to Rochester to go to those schools, they found that this city really supports the community. So they tend to stay and they get jobs and they raise families. So it's great to see, what a strong community we have here for individuals with hearing loss. But strangely enough, we don't have, there's no audiology program. There's a minor at Nazareth, but there's no graduate program for audiology in Rochester, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But the, in conferences, the most of the conferences I deal with are sort of industry conferences, hearing aid companies and tech companies and stuff like that. And they don't, to my knowledge, they don't really come here. Maybe some of the state chapters will do stuff, but what we do have here, and it's a national organization and they have, local chapters all over the place, is the Hearing Loss Association of America, HLAA. And they're a fantastic organization and anybody can be a part. Doesn't matter if you've got mild hearing loss or you have a profound hearing loss. It's a really great resource for people that are looking for a community and to get answers and to ask questions. And they do regular meetings and meetups, and it's a really, really cool organization. I encourage anybody that feels like they would benefit from it or have a family member that would benefit from it to check it out. It's almost like a support group. I kind of put that in quotes, but it really is. And as a provider, whenever I get the opportunity to speak at one of those events or attend one of those events, I feel like I walk away learning so much more, even though maybe I'm supposed to be the one educating. I feel like it's very reciprocal and I get a lot more out of it. It's great to hear a room full of people with concerns talk about, their experiences with hearing loss, hearing aids, hearing healthcare providers. It's pretty informative.
That sounds super interesting. Dr. Horton, we have a question from one of our from our live stream.
Cool.
Brian Caterino wants to know, how come hearing aids aren't covered by Medicare?
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
So, and I can't even give you a good answer to that. I mean, probably it's because they're expensive, right? And if they were covered by Medicare, somebody's got to pay for those. So who's doing it? But there is actually a bill that is coming up that is being introduced that is going to hopefully allow for more access for Medicare. It's like literally happening as we speak. So my profession is changing rapidly right now. And one of the things that's happening is we're seeing a lot of different insurances getting involved. You're starting to see a lot of third-party insurance companies coming in. So like if you have Blue Choice Medicare, they offer you this third-party discount program you can work with. Or if you have United Healthcare, there's this third-party discount program you can work with. And so if there's a local provider that works with these companies, you can go and see them and take advantage of this benefit. 10 years ago, there was very little insurance contribution towards hearing aids for any insurance, but you're starting to see that change a lot because they're realizing that it's something that we really need as a community and as a society.
It's so funny. I'm going to speak of this in my closing monologue, but last night, so like the cosmic waves of life sometimes like align me with this individual. I came from a gig and I had an hour to spare, and I like went and sat at Flaherty's in Webster. And this man sits next to me at some point, and we were at the bar, and he comes and sits next to me. He was an older man, and at some point he just like whips out a hearing aid, and like he had his like medical bill. He was waiting for somebody to meet him, And he just like randomly starts like striking conversation. And I'm like, in a way, like thinking like, whoa, like this is so random. Like this guy's talking to me about hearing aids. And here I am today, you know, like talking to you. And but he was just like saying like insurance wise, like he only needed one hearing aid and it was like close to $1,300. And he was like, this is how much it costs. Like he was just in disbelief that like that's how much like one of them costs. And his insurance luckily covered most of that cost. Like so he ended up spending only like 300 of that. He's like, you believe this? Like this is incredible. So it was like just funny. But yeah, it is crazy how much like that's no joke. Like the price for that for somebody that like really maybe who doesn't have good insurance or can
Mhm.
afford that, they're just walking around like unable to hear. Um,
I think you bring up a really interesting point about the cost of hearing aids. And I have to answer this a lot. And actually, I had a student that was with me for the last semester, and he was struggling with that. He's like, I have a hard time with knowing how expensive these things are. And I had to remind him, or maybe not even remind him, maybe he didn't even realize it, but hearing aids are medical devices, first and foremost. And even though they may look small and plastic, there is a ridiculous amount of research and development that goes into those. And they are little supercomputers.
yeah.
People don't, well, yeah, I mean, people do complain about how expensive their cell phones are. But when you think about like your iPhone and how expensive those are, they're little supercomputers in your hand. What you're wearing behind your ear is just as sophisticated. So there's so much time and energy and money that goes into the development of hearing aids. And then on top of that, you know, I think people often they attach the price to the product, right? They attach the price to just the device itself. And what they don't realize is everything that went into that device becoming an item, becoming a medical device. But then it's also what you're paying for is all of our professional time and services, my professional expertise. That is part of the pricing. So when you're able to sort of parse those things out, suddenly that cost makes a little bit more sense. And a lot of places historically have used what's called a bundled pricing structure. So you're not just paying for the hearing aid, but you're paying for 3 years of follow-up care. You're paying for warranties for repairs and loss and damage and all that stuff. So but you're starting to see places are unbundling those prices a little bit. So it's like, okay, you're paying for the device with maybe a small markup and pay for your services separately. So that's one of the changes that we're seeing happen right now because I mentioned earlier 20% of people get hearing aids, right? One of the big barriers to that is the cost. So how can we bring those down and how can we get more insurance involved? And that's something that we're looking at constantly as a profession, while also being able to keep the lights on and our doors open for our practices.
Sure. Could you explain the difference between your practice as an audiologist versus just like somebody who who like deals hearing aids or like you're a doctor,
Mhm.
right? Which is different than just walking into a place and getting a hearing aid. Could you just explain the difference?
Yeah, so there are audiologists, and audiology. You need a doctorate degree. That's what the AUD is next to my name on the screen. It used to be a master's degree, and then about 15 years ago, they made the requirements much more rigorous, and they doubled the amount of graduate school education and changed it to a doctorate degree because they really found that there was so much more that we needed to be able to offer to our patients as far as expertise and anatomy and diagnosing and treating hearing loss and balance disorders. But you also have hearing aid dispensers, and it's just a certificate that you can get to sell hearing aids. You go through maybe a 1 year training process, and then you can sell hearing aids. And every state has different regulations as far as what dispensers are allowed to do versus audiologists. And audiologists are also hearing aid dispensers. And in New York, you have two different licenses. So I am a licensed hearing aid dispenser, but it falls under my licensure as an audiologist. So really it comes down to a difference in education and expertise. Hearing aid dispensers know hearing aids, whereas audiologists, we really specialize in hearing loss, hearing conservation, diagnosing, treating balance disorders, because vertigo is an ear-related disorder.
I wanted to talk about that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But yeah, we were introduced. I find this really interesting. So like we were introduced by Caitlin Vitozzi of Tozi Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Caitlin. I was introduced to you as the mindful audiologist, which I love, and like that's like burned in my brain.
I love
it's
that.
great, and you are. But I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what the correlation between hearing and balance is.
Yeah, for sure. So the inner ear has each ear has one hearing organ in it and 5 balance organs. So we've got 10 balance organs between our 2 ears, and they're each responsible for different directions, gravity, sense of gravity, linear motion, forward and backward, side to side, spinning, etc. And when we move, that part of the inner ear sends a signal up to the brain, and then the brain sends a signal down to the eyes, and the eyes make their correction for when we're turning. And then that's all incorporated in our musculoskeletal system. So those 3 things really work together to keep us upright. So when people have vertigo, when I say vertigo, we're really talking about like a room spinning dizziness. Like you just were on the tilt-a-whirl at Seabreeze, but that's what it feels like, awful. But you were standing still, right? And there are different types of vertigo, different causes of vertigo. Some last a few seconds, some can last weeks. So that's really an ear-related condition. Excuse me. Some people think vertigo is just kind of a steady unsteadiness, disequilibrium. But really, when we talk about vertigo, we're talking about that room spinning sensation. So a lot of audiologists will work with patients that experience vertigo to help diagnose or either do a differential diagnosis to rule in or out. Is it an ear condition or is it more of a neurological condition? We can treat some vertigos or refer to physical therapy if we need to.
I was going to ask you, how do you treat something like that?
It depends on the type of vertigo. The most common is something called BPPV. It stands for benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. And it's the result of these little crystals in the inner ear that hang out in 2 of the organs, 2 of the balance organs. And they can come loose randomly, often from like a head injury or age. And when those crystals start floating around one of the other 3 balance organs that they sit right next to, those organs can activate and sends a signal up to the brain. And now the brain thinks that you're turning when you're not. So it's sending its signal down to the eyes and the rest of your body to make its correction for the turn, but you're standing still. But it feels like the room is spinning around you. So we can put people through a series of exercises to diagnose that. And when I say exercises, I mean different positions, put them in different head and body positions. And based on what we see the eyes doing, we can determine which ear and which organ's affected. And then once we figure that out, we can put you through a series of corrective exercises where we move you around on the table, kind of roll you over in very specific ways. And it actually gets those crystals right back into the right organ. And it's super treatable. So I will throw this out as a disclaimer. If you think you have that type of vertigo, go see an ENT or an audiologist that treats it. Do not get online and try to figure out the exercise yourself, because without the diagnosis, you don't know which ear, so you don't know which exercise to do.
So interesting. Yeah, my ex-father-in-law used to have vertigo, and that was the first I ever heard of it. And it just sounds like so painful. And I mean, not painful, like he would vomit because like everything, he was like, everything just feels like my world is just flipping,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I cannot imagine. And it's hard to imagine like what a cure, like how you would treat that beyond what you just told me. Um, so is somebody like for somebody who is born without hearing, would they necessarily have balance issues, or like do they see audiologists regularly?
They certainly can, and see audiologists. You can have hearing loss and never experience vertigo, and I would say that's definitely the most common scenario. You can have vertigo and not have hearing loss, but then there are some conditions where there's certain diseases like Meniere's disease is a disease whose hallmarks are vertigo and a certain type of hearing loss and a certain type of tinnitus, ringing in the ears. But for individuals that were born without hearing, it doesn't mean that they're specifically going to have any vertigo issues. Those would be completely unrelated if they did.
So interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting to actually research like the ear. There's so much to like we take it for granted. Like all these simple things, like just the mechanics, the general mechanics of our brain is so continually impressive to me. Like all the things that it does for us, and how
Mm-hmm.
these things work together, and we just don't ever consider it. But one of the things I had read that caught my attention was that typically people that go along with hearing loss untreated, they can experience a decreased quality of life in the sense where it sometimes could link to depression, sad, feeling overall sadness, anxiety, and paranoia. Makes it hard for them to foster their relationships. I mean, being a good listener is important for the quality of your social life. Do you believe the inability to properly communicate due to hearing losses could be the reason for such emotional struggles, or being tied to such emotional struggles?
Yeah, it absolutely can be. And I want to make this clear that, there are individuals with profound hearing losses that don't hear and
Mm,
they communicate perfectly well,
perfectly fine. Yeah.
you know, um, and their hearing loss, they do not perceive their hearing loss to affect their quality of life. But, or not even but, individuals that I mostly work with are people that had normal or typical hearing at one point and they have lost it over time for whatever reason. And when you go through life hearing the world a certain way and suddenly you can't anymore, that can have a real negative impact on your quality of life. And we use that term a lot with our patients and their family members as well. Um, Especially when family is bringing in someone like, listen, mom, dad, you really need to get your hearing checked, and they say like, listen, you're not participating, you're not engaging, you're withdrawing, you're sad, you're just not the same person you used to. When hearing loss goes untreated over time, you'll find people will start to isolate themselves and they will often withdraw because they can't keep up with communications and they have a hard time following what's going on at the dinner table or out at a restaurant, or they hear something and they respond to it, but they didn't hear it properly, so they respond totally inappropriately, and then everybody laughs, and it's like, oh, that was funny, haha. But over time, you feel like people are laughing at you because you didn't hear them properly. So people just start to withdraw from those settings and they don't
Yeah.
engage with their family. And there was some really incredible research that came out of Temple University a few years ago that showed a connection to untreated hearing loss and cognitive decline. And it wasn't so much that, oh, you have hearing loss, you're going to end up with Alzheimer's or dementia, but it's when your hearing loss goes untreated and you stop engaging with your world because of it, you start to lose that rich, nutrition that your brain needs from those social engagements. And so they're trying to really encourage people to treat the hearing loss so that they can engage with their family and their friends and their communities.
Yeah, it's really interesting and it makes total sense, like with today's theme, like I was digging more into the emotional quality of like listening and communication, our relationships with people, that we carry on a daily basis, how we interact with our coworkers, with our own family, members of our family, our spouses, our, significant others. A lot of times we do a lot of talking and not so much listening, and that the impact of feeling heard really is worth noting. Like when people feel heard, they feel understood, or at least like that there was an attempt to be understood. um, but I don't know, what do you, in your opinion, how do hearing and listening differ?
I think hearing is sort of the mechanical process. Sound comes in, the ear processes it, sends it up to the brain attaches meaning to it. Listening is more of an active participation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I hear stuff around me. I can hear, patients out in the hall right now, but listening is when we're really, I think, engaging and connecting to the people around us. And I think that we don't do that as much as we should. And I have to remind myself at times, um, even with my patients, I spend a lot of time talking to them and educating them and training them on whatever it is that they're doing. And, I realize I need more information from them. I need them to communicate to me what it is that they are experiencing and what they need, so I'm not just going through kind of like what I have memorized all day long, and just really kind of like opening up my mind to their thought process. And that goes for, I think, all of our relationships. Um, Listening is how we make connections with our community and the world around us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I feel like that really is what bridges our connection to people. And like you're saying, like even on a business level, personally getting to understand the needs of that person, that you're encountered with, makes you the outstanding audiologist that you are. It's you're making that effort to understand the situation rather than just being clinical and just like, checking off, making all the checks. And people appreciate that. I think like they just want to they want to get to the root of the problem. And I also think like on the emotional side of things, like think about conflicts, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times conflicts come about because something's being, either somebody's not listening or they're hearing something incorrectly, misinterpretations, right? How it's what you're hearing, but how you're absorbing that information, and how that plays on your sensitivities and vulnerabilities and insecurities. And that's what brings out a response. So I think if we actually like listen and give people a chance to talk and to say their piece, and not focus so much on a response and what's like really agitating us, then we could probably be we could resolve conflicts so much easier,
Yeah.
right?
We spend so much time, I think, just wanting to be heard that we just talk at people. But
Yeah.
if we take a moment to actually stop and listen to the other person, it can help bridge that gap, as you said, and to help break down whatever that barrier is. I think we as a society has gotten really good in the past few years about just screaming at each other and talking at each other, or talking into an echo chamber, and
Yeah.
not really trying to engage in meaningful conversation with people that have differing opinions than us. Um, and it's just a lot of people talking and no one's listening.
Yeah, it happens a lot, a lot more than I think we all like to admit. But so Dr. Horton, can you tell us about Rochester Hearing and Speech Center's upcoming event? You have a big event coming up.
Yeah, we do. Can I talk about the agency really quickly
Of course. Oh
so
yeah,
people know
please.
who we
Yes.
are and what we do? So Rochester Hearing and Speech Center is a not-for-profit agency, and we have been in the Rochester community for 99 years. The field of audiology actually hasn't even been around that long, but it was started by a group of nuns that were just helping people with hearing loss in any way they could. So it's, we're coming up on our 100th anniversary next year. We're super excited about that. I don't know if there are any other speech and hearing agencies in the country that have been around as long. But we have the audiology side. So we diagnose and treat hearing disorders, hearing conservation. I have my musician's hearing clinic. We do central auditory processing, testing, newborn hearing, screening protocols. We work with a lot of pediatric patients. And then on the other side of the agency, we have our educational and clinical services. So we do early intervention with the county. So working with kids from 0 to 3 who are at risk of developmental and delays and disabilities. We've got our preschool development groups who are age 3 to 5, and we do speech pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, special education, and we do private therapy as well as private tutoring for kids pre-K to 5. So we've got our hands in a lot of areas, and we've had a pretty big footprint in the community for a long time. And as a not-for-profit, it's really helpful when working with patients that need hearing aids, because they know that we're not trying to just sell them something. We don't work on commission or sales goal, which most audio or hearing aid practices have to deal with. So, people really, I think, feel more comfortable knowing that we're not just trying to sell them something when they come in, that we're only making recommendations based on their individual needs. So. But yeah, the event that you asked about, we're super excited about. It's a fundraising event as a not-for-profit. We got to keep the lights on and the doors open. So we're always looking for donations from the community. We're doing an event. It's called Music to Your Ears. And it's going to be on Thursday, June 24th at 7 p.m. It's a virtual event. It's a one-time only event that you do need to purchase a ticket for. You can go to our website, which is www.rhsc.org, and you can find all the information and the link to the ticket there. You can see a current list of artists that will be performing, including the Amanda Ashley Trio.
Woo!
Super excited to have you guys involved. My band, Periodic Table of Elephants, will be performing. Evan Harrington, who is a Rochester native, but a tenured Broadway performer. He's contributing. We've got the RPO is contributing, North Star String Band. Yeah, so we've got a great lineup, and there's still some really cool names that will be announced soon. So you can go to the website, check on the artists that are going to be there. We'll be talking about the agency during the event, what we do, give you some more details about, how we help out with the lifespan of patients in the community for all sorts of needs. And we're going to be showing lots of really cool local music performances as well. And the tickets are a donation. So they start at $10, but you can donate as much as you'd like.
Incredible. And where could they tune into this?
It's going to be broadcast through YouTube. So when you click on that link, you'll see all the information about where you can find it.
Fantastic. Dr. Horton, thank you so much. What an interesting conversation. And thank you. It's really such a pleasure to be able to converse with you again. I hope to see you in life at some point. Actually, I will. Well, I want to talk to you after, and I want my appointment because I listen to music too loud all the time.
Yeah, most of us do. So
yeah,
come in, we'll talk about it, and we'll see what's going on. And I want to check out your in-ear monitors.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring them, and I might bring my mom along too because I want you to help her with her situation.
I'd be happy
anyway,
to.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So going back to last night, I briefly got into my story, but last night I reloaded my car with gear coming out of a gig, and I headed up to the local establishment kind of up the road from where I live. And I met Beau for an appetizer and a beer. And it was the first time this evening in general was the first time I had been out since the recent lift on COVID restrictions here in New York. And I mean, whoa, it's so weird. I mean, it really has brought to my attention just how liberating it feels to have just such simple liberties back. But the whole evening, I honestly carried this like sense of guilt with me, like I was doing something wrong. You know, it's crazy how in this amount of time, you know, just in over a year, you know, how accustomed we've come to accepting things for the way they were. You know, in some ways it felt like we were just going to walk around with masks forever, right? All partitions are moved, you know, there's no like every other seat, you know, it's like going from one extreme to the other. It felt crazy. Anyway, we sat at the bar, and that older gentleman that I had mentioned earlier, he slips in the seat next to me as we're chowing down on our appetizer. And I overhear him asking the bartender for a charge for his phone. He had his phone, and he had basically just the cable hanging out of it. And he was looking for a charging block. And he had been there the night before, and whoever was working the bar that night plugged him in and gave him a charge. And the bartender's like, no, I'm sorry, we don't. We just, it's not here. I'm sorry. And I realized in that moment, I actually had one of those charging blocks in my purse because I tore it out of my wall before I left for my gig, and I put it in there just in case I needed it. So I figured, you know, we're not there for very long. I was basically, you know, we were wrapping things up and we were getting ready to square up with the bartender. But I figured, you know what, something's better than nothing. I offer this man my charger. And he graciously took it. And, you know, I glance over slightly to my right and I see him just like kind of bustling around. And he pulls out this hearing aid, and you know you know his basically his visit summary from his wherever he was at, the U of R, where he got his hearing aid from. And he, you know, catches my eye and he's like, this thing right here is like, this thing costs that much. And he's holding up the paper and he points to it. And it said about, I don't remember the exact number, but it was just shy of like $1,300. And he's like, could you believe it? This thing right here, just one of these costs this much. And he's like, but look at this. He flips over to like the third page and he points to a different number, which was far less high. It was like about 300. And he's like, you know what? Like, thank goodness for this insurance that I have. You know, like it felt expensive, but look how much I would have paid. And he's like, it's crazy, you know, like how expensive these things could be. And obviously, we know now, like after talking to Dr. Horton, you know, why things are, you know, priced the way they are. But yeah, you know, it is astonishing. And so he, fortunately, you know, his medical insurance was okay. I noticed his name at the top of the page as he pointed to that second number, and it reads Wallace. And I asked him, you know, if people referred to him as Wally. And he goes, no, 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 no. He's like, all my friends call me Duke. So I introduced myself, and then we briefly chatted till my bill came back, everything was paid, and then we eventually parted ways. You know, the irony of life. What are the chances that this man sits next to me, you know, like with this hearing aid when I'm having this conversation today? I mean, I didn't learn very much more about Duke last night than what I share with you in this moment. But I mean, the takeaway had value. All it takes sometimes, you know, is just lending an ear to someone. You know, the general company that a listening ear can provide can be more meaningful than you even know it. It's all about those subtle moments in life which we choose to give a touch of ourselves to the stranger in need, or somebody who just wants, you know, to share their story. We're all so much happier and content when we feel acknowledged, heard, and understood. Listening is that intimate connection we build in showing others that what they feel is important. It's what helps us to understand and to reason with each other's differences of opinion. It's what makes our relationships and connection with ourselves more meaningful. In the heat of conflict, you know, often we talk over one another and we hastily rush to judgment based on what we think we're hearing. because we aren't fully giving the argument our attention. Or how often do we give that argument the full attention? We rush to defend, we can misinterpret. Our connection's disrupted because our instant reaction is greater than our ability to listen. We communicate best when we not only listen to the words that are spoken, but the human emotion behind what is said. We can all be better partners, better coworkers, better siblings, better parents, better mentors, better leaders, and better humans if we just took the opportunity to hear and acknowledge what meaningfully stands behind one's expression. Beyond that, just as it's important to listen to others, you got to listen to your heart. Often we ignore what's long been calling because of all the everyday distractions we have. There's so many distractions all the time, right? And we tend to settle. Listen to what makes you happy. Pay attention, because that awareness is worth. It's not easy to get there, but when you have it, you live life differently. You live life more happily, and you treat those around you with more kindness. Contribute good energy and just watch the domino effect it can have on the world around you. It's really just as simple as that. Thank you, Dr. Gregory Horton. You're amazing. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this beautiful day here. For those that are in Rochester, if you're looking for a place to grab a cocktail tonight, come see me at California Roland 2 at the Port of Rochester. I'll be playing a solo show from 6:30 to 9:30. Thank you to Beau Productions. You rock. And he's what makes everything look so beautiful and run appropriately. And thank you to our show sponsors, Rochester Woman Online, to Chris Sirianni at IT Insights, and Bridgett Hoag at Empire Realty. You guys have an awesome weekend. Take good care of yourselves. Bye.